Hey guys! In today's video, I bring you an impressive and transformative story. Let's meet Thaddeus Cole, a pastor who faced a profound crisis of faith and, during a spiritual journey in the dangerous Rocky Mountains, literally died and came back with a shocking revelation. Heaven is not a physical place, but a state of divine union accessible to all. What he saw on the other side will shake everything you believe about the afterlife and the true purpose of existence. So before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any impactful content like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Now, get ready for this intense journey full of revelations. My name is Thaddeus Cole. If you had met me a few years ago, you would probably describe me as a man of faith, a devout pastor who led a small congregation in the quiet town of Nederland, Colorado. For many, I was a rock, always with the right words to comfort the afflicted and guide the lost. But, as so often happens, the facade I maintained to the world didn't reflect what was really going on inside me. From a young age, my life revolved around church. My parents were fervent believers, and from an early age I learned that serving God was the greatest purpose I could have. My path seemed clear. I studied theology, took the pulpit at the local church, and dedicated my life to spreading the word of God. For many years, my heart truly burned with true passion. I believed in redemption, in heaven as an eternal reward, and in hell as a warning to the backslidden. But all that started to change. In 1980, a feeling of emptiness came over me. It was as if a dense fog had enveloped my soul. My prayers echoed in the void, and my voice in sermon seemed more like a mechanical act than a true expression of faith. I remember looking at the church pews, full of hopeful faces, and thinking, am I fooling them all? At night, lying next to Grace, my wife, sleep didn't come. I stared at the ceiling, looking for answers that weren't coming. "Tad, are you okay?" Grace asked once, her soft voice cutting through the darkness of the room. I don't know anymore," I replied, my voice breaking. "I feel like I lost God." His eyes reflected a mixture of concern and understanding. She didn't pressure me. She just held my hand and stayed there, present. But inside me, the battle continued. I knew I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't preach about love and the divine presence if I couldn't feel it myself. It was then that I decided I needed to get away. I needed to find God, or at least understand why he had remained silent to me. I told my congregation about my decision to step aside temporarily. The reaction was immediate and divided. Some people were stunned, as if they had just heard that the pastor himself had lost his faith. Others looked at me with compassion, perhaps because they also had doubts that they never dared to admit. I didn't know how to deal with it myself. I was always the advisor, never the one who needed guidance. Grace stood by my side, firm as ever. "You need this," she told me, as we organized the few belongings I would take on the trip. "I know you will find what you are looking for." His words were like an anchor amid the storm raging inside me. I didn't know if she really believed that or if she was just trying to keep me upright. It was then that my old friend, Michael Grant, called me. He was a practical man, an experienced mountaineer who saw God in the rugged trails and silence of the forests. "Come with me to the Rockies," he suggested. "Maybe you will find answers in nature. Sometimes the silence of the mountains speaks more than any sermon." The idea seemed absurd and, at the same time, irresistible. Far from the walls of the church, far from the expectations of the community, perhaps I could finally hear something beyond the echo of my own doubt. Over the next few days, I prepared for the journey. Michael taught me basic survival skills: how to use an axe, how to make a makeshift shelter in the snow, how to stay warm in the bitter cold of the mountains. With each class, I felt closer to the adventure and, in some ways, further away from my old life. I needed this. I needed to strip away everything I was to discover what was left of me. On the morning of departure, Grace hugged me for a long time. "Come back to us," she whispered. I nodded, but the truth is that I didn't even know if I would come back. Not because I feared the mountains, but because I didn't know if I would find my way back to my own faith. The first few days in the Rockies were challenging. The thin air seemed to sap my strength with each step, and the weight of the backpack dug into my shoulders with constant pain. Michael, always in front, moved with the dexterity of someone who knew the terrain intimately. I, on the other hand, felt like a stranger, not just on the mountain, but in my own skin. The nights were even more difficult. We set up camp under the starry sky, and as the cold wind cut through the silence, I huddled inside my sleeping bag, trying to find some comfort. Michael struggled to keep his spirits up. "Look at these stars, Tad. Have you ever thought that each of them might have their own worlds, their own stories? That's how I see God, not in buildings or books, but in that infinity above us." I wanted to feel the same. I wanted to look up at the sky and be filled with awe, but instead, all I saw was vastness, emptiness. My inner world seemed to reflect that dark, unfathomable space. During the day, the exhausting pace of walking forced me to keep my mind busy, but at night, doubts came like ghosts. Michael and I talked around the campfire, and he talked about his own spiritual experiences, stories of near falls off cliffs, and how he felt a greater presence saving him. "Perhaps heaven is not a place but a state of mind," he once said. "Maybe that's where we find peace, no matter where we are." These words echoed in me, but they still didn't find fertile soil. I was like a barren land, unable to absorb the dew of faith. However, something was starting to change. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the nature around me seemed to whisper. The sound of snow beneath my boots, the rustle of trees in the wind, the steady flow of a frozen stream. It was all like a silent prayer. Perhaps, I thought, the divine was not in what I had always sought, but in what I had never noticed. Still, the fear persisted, and as I would soon discover, the trials were just beginning. On the seventh day, the weather changed drastically. The sky, once blue and clear, was quickly covered by heavy gray clouds. The wind, which was once just an icy whisper, turned into a deafening howl. Michael looked at the horizon, and his eyes, always calm, now reflected concern. "We need to get down, and quickly," he said, his voice almost carried by the wind. We quickened our pace, but the snow began to fall with suffocating intensity, erasing the trails and making the terrain treacherous. The slippery rocks, covered in ice, made every movement difficult. My breathing became heavier, the cold air burning my lungs. I felt despair growing, a tightness in my chest that went beyond the physical. It was as if the storm outside was mirroring the storm inside me. During the descent, one of the ropes we used for safety got stuck in a rock. Michael struggled to free her, his gloved hands slipping on the frozen material. Meanwhile, my body was already showing signs of exhaustion. My legs were shaking, my fingers were tingling, and my vision was starting to blur. "Tad, hold on tight." Michael's voice sounded distant, as if he were speaking through a glass wall. I wanted to respond, but my words caught in my throat. The cold took over me. It wasn't just a feeling of freezing, it was a numbness, a surrender to emptiness. My knees gave way and I felt the snow hug me. There was no more pain, just a dangerous stillness. My vision closed, and the world around me disappeared. As my body gave out, my consciousness seemed to fluctuate. The sound of the storm was replaced by absolute silence. There was no more wind, no cold, no fear, just a soft, welcoming darkness, like the inside of a womb. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel lost. I just was. What I didn't know was that this was just the gateway to a journey that would change everything I believed. When my consciousness detached from the body, there was no pain or fear. It was as if I were floating, weightless, without the weight of worries or the deadly cold that previously consumed me. I remember looking down and seeing my own body lying in the snow, lips blue, eyes half closed. As Michael fought desperately to keep me warm, his voice echoed, but it seemed to come from far away. I knew he was screaming my name, but strangely, I felt no urgency to respond. The darkness around me was not the frightening emptiness I had always imagined. On the contrary, it was welcoming, like a soft blanket wrapped in warmth. There was nothing to fear. I was suspended in a state of pure acceptance, where every part of me, physical and spiritual, seemed to dissolve into something greater. Then, the light came. At first, it was just a dot on the dark horizon, but it quickly began to grow, like dawn after a long night. It wasn't just a physical light, it was a living, pulsing presence that radiated love in all directions. I didn't see defined shapes. There were no angels or traditional religious figures, just this energy, this essence of pure kindness and acceptance. The feeling was indescribable. There was no more cold, no hunger, no tiredness. I was just a being, a spark of light floating in the immensity. Everything around me vibrated in harmony. and every particle seemed to whisper that I was loved, that I had always been loved, even in the darkest moments of my life. A silent communication took place, not in words, but in impressions, in deep feelings. Light enveloped me, and immediately, my life began to unfold before me, not like a distant movie, but like I was living each moment again. I was both the protagonist and the spectator. I felt the joy of hugs, the warmth of laughter, but also the pain of the tears I caused and the anguish of those I hurt. There was no conviction. The light didn't judge me. I was my own judge, and that was the most powerful lesson. Deep down, I understood that that state of being, one was true heaven. It was not a reward for merit or good deeds. It was the essence of the divine, accessible to all who opened themselves to it. Heaven was not a destination, but a return to who we always were, pure love and unity with the whole. Reviewing my life was both a beautiful and painful process. The light around me didn't speak to me in words, but I felt its messages directly in my soul. Each memory emerged not just as an image, but as a complete experience. I could feel the emotions of each moment, not just mine, but those of the people around me. When I saw scenes from my childhood, I was overwhelmed by the innocence and curiosity that used to drive me. I saw my mother hugging me after falling off her bike. I felt again the warmth of her touch and the security she conveyed. I saw my father, stern but loving, teaching me to read the Bible for the first time. In that moment, I realized that even small gestures of love were eternal, imprinted in the light like golden sparks, but not everything was good memories. In a split second, I was whisked away to a cold night where a young man from my congregation, Ethan Miller, came to me seeking guidance. He was lost, tormented by doubts and sins he believed were unforgivable. Tercy, stuck in the rigidity of my beliefs at the time, spoke more about judgment than about love. I saw him leave my room with his shoulders hunched, his heart heavy, and in that spiritual state, I felt the weight of the pain I caused. It was like a sharp pang, but not physical, a pain in the soul. The light did not condemn me. She just showed me the truth. No matter how much I preached about God's love, I often failed to truly demonstrate it. But at the same time, I saw moments when my touch, my word, or my look had brought comfort to someone. The balance between good and evil was not a value judgment, but a deep understanding that each action reverberates in eternity. It was then that the light gave me a vision of planet Earth. From above, the world seemed like a living sphere, pulsing with energy. Each human being was a golden spark, some shining brightly, others almost extinguished, shrouded in dark mists of pain, fear, and anger. But whenever someone made a kind gesture, a hug, a kind word, an act of forgiveness, the darkness receded and the light spread. I understood, on a level so deep that human words could never express, that love was the most powerful force in the universe, and that heaven was not a privilege reserved for a few, but a reality accessible to all. It was only necessary to open our hearts and allow this divine light to shine through us. In that state of absolute light and love, I was faced with a choice. The feeling was that I could remain there, merged with the divine essence, free from the pain and limitations of the physical world. It was a tempting, almost irresistible offer. Peace was infinite, and love was omnipresent. There was no more cold, tiredness, or fear. I was just a spark of light in the vast ocean of creation, and that was enough. But then, the images started to change. I saw my wife, Grace, sitting in the living room of our small house in Nederland. His hands shook as he held a cup of tea, his eyes lost somewhere on the wall. I could feel his pain, the emptiness my absence would cause. I saw my friend Michael, still on the mountain, holding my limp body, his tears freezing on his face as he screamed my name into the wind. His pain was cutting, a blade of despair that cut through my very soul. The light didn't pressure me. There was no urgency, no imposition. It was as if she were saying, "It's your choice. You've always had free will." And at that moment, I understood that true divine love was just that, the freedom to choose. I could stay. I could surrender to eternal rest. But the love I felt for those I would leave behind spoke louder. Even though I knew that returning would mean pain, cold, and possibly physical consequences, I chose to return, not out of a sense of religious duty or fear of judgment, but simply out of love. Love for my wife, for my friend, for the life I could still touch with the new understanding I had gained. The moment I made that decision, the light intensified. It wasn't a goodbye, but a hug. I felt as if every particle of me was being filled with this divine energy. And then, like a snap, everything went black. Peace gave way to pain. The lightness was replaced by the weight of my own body, and I heard Michael's voice again, desperate, calling my name. The return was not smooth. My skin burned, my muscles were tight, and every breath was an effort. But even in the pain, I knew I had brought with me a fragment of that light, and that would change everything. Returning to my body was a brutal collision between the spiritual and the physical. I opened my eyes and everything around me seemed blurry, shrouded in a cold fog. The sound of the wind howling still filled the air, but now, alongside it, was Michael's voice. He was hunched over me, his hands shaking as he rubbed my arms and tried to keep me warm. "Thaddeus, stay with me, friend. Don't give up now." His voice was hoarse, mixing desperation and determination. The pain returned with intensity. My entire body ached. The hypothermia left me immobile, but my mind was awake. It was as if I had been pulled back into the physical world with an electric shock. I coughed, and the feeling of cold air entering my lungs was almost unbearable. But every twinge of pain was a reminder that I was alive, that my choice had been granted. Michael managed to drag me to a makeshift shelter among the rocks. He used his own body to warm me, kept me conscious by telling old stories, talking about the summer we spent together at the lake when we were still teenagers. Even in my fragile state, I could feel the love in his every word, and that reinforced the spark of light that I had brought with me. Rescue arrived the next morning. I don't remember much about that moment, just fragments. The sound of the helicopter's blades, the flashing lights, the muffled voices of the paramedics. I was taken to the hospital, where my physical recovery began. But internally, I was already in a much deeper healing process. Grace came as soon as she heard the news. When he opened the door to the hospital room, his face was a mixture of relief and surprise. "Tad," she whispered, as if she needed to make sure I was really there. "I'm back," I replied, my voice weak but firm, "and I have so much to tell you." The physical pain, days of physical therapy, and sleepless nights in the hospital were insignificant compared to what I had experienced. I knew my life would never be the same, and deep down, a flame of purpose began to burn. I had returned not just to live, but to share what I learned. And this journey, I knew, was just beginning. Physical recovery was just the first step. For weeks, my body slowly adjusted to life again. The doctors were impressed with my resilience, but they didn't know that the true strength keeping me alive came not from the treatments, but from the light I had brought back with me. Grace was always by my side, and although she knew I had changed, she never pressured me to tell her what really happened on that mountain. She waited, with her silent patience, until I was ready. When I returned to church for the first time, the feeling was strange. The walls that once seemed welcoming to me now seemed narrow and limiting. In the pulpit, where I once felt safe, there was now a slight anxiety. I couldn't just pick up where I left off. I had seen the truth, and it was far greater than any sermon I had ever preached. On Sunday, the congregation gathered to hear the pastor who almost died. There was curiosity and expectation. I looked at those faces, some familiar, some new, and realized how much they expected me to bring a conventional message, one that reaffirmed their comfortable beliefs. But I couldn't, not after what I had experienced. I know many of you expect me to tell you how I saw heaven, angels, maybe even God on a golden throne. I began, my voice a little hoarse. But what I saw was different. I saw no judgment. I heard no divine thunder. What I found was a light, a presence of absolute love, and an inescapable truth. Heaven is not a place. It is a state of union with the divine, and it is available to everyone right now. The reactions were immediate. Some leaned forward, their eyes shining with new hope. Others crossed their arms, closing themselves off in the face of what seemed like heresy. I saw some people leave, shaking their heads, and I felt a stab of pain. But this pain was different. She didn't keep me away from the light. On the contrary, it reinforced my commitment to the truth. After the service, Ethan Miller approached. His eyes, once dark and hesitant, now had a gleam of curiosity. "Pastor, do you think even someone like me can feel this light?" "Not just you can, Ethan," I replied, placing my hand on his shoulder. You are already part of it. We all are. Little by little, the message spread. People began to show up at church not because they feared hell, but because they sought peace. Young people who felt lost found a space where they could explore their spirituality without judgment. And little by little, my little congregation became a beacon of acceptance and love amid the chaos of the world. My transformation was not limited to the pulpit. It permeated every aspect of my life. Before it, I saw my mission as a religious obligation, a burden that I carried in the name of saving souls. Now, my mission was simply to love, to live this light that I had experienced and to share it with everyone around me. Grace, always my faithful companion, was also deeply touched by my change. Our relationship, which was previously guided by routine and fulfilling roles, has now become filled with new conversations, with a mutual search for the divine in every small moment. Our home has become a refuge. People came not just to listen to sermons, but to talk, to share their pains and joys. Grace began leading small support groups, particularly for women who felt lost or stifled by community expectations. She had the gift of listening without judging, of offering her support without trying to fix anyone. It was a practical love, an incarnate spirituality. Ethan Miller, the young man I once pushed away with my rigidity, has become a close friend. He started helping at the church, organizing events for young people, creating an environment where they could express their doubts without fear. One afternoon, as we were painting the church hall, he confided to me, "I always thought God was out there, somewhere far away, and that I would never be worthy enough. Now I feel like he's here." He pointed to his chest, and I knew he had found his own light. But not everyone embraced the change. Some longtime members of the congregation walked away, uncomfortable with the more inclusive message. I received anonymous letters, some calling me a false prophet, others lamenting the church's lost path. During a community meeting, an elderly man, who had always been respected by everyone, stood up and said loudly, "This is not what we were taught. Heaven is for the righteous and hell for sinners. Your message will only confuse people." I took a deep breath, feeling the tension in the air. "I understand your concern," I replied, my voice calm, "but I can no longer preach something I haven't experienced. What I experienced on that mountain was a love without conditions, without barriers, and it is this love that I want to share. I'm not here to change anyone's beliefs, but to offer a new perspective. If this touches even one life, then my mission will be accomplished." The room fell silent. Some remained suspicious, but others opened up. And, little by little, the seeds of that new message began to germinate. I knew my role was not to convert, but to inspire. And that, perhaps, was the true purpose of my journey. Years passed, and my mission continued to unfold in ways I could never have predicted. The small church in Nederland became a meeting place not only for those seeking spiritual answers, but also for those who needed a shoulder to lean on, a safe space where their pain could be welcomed. Young people who felt lost found purpose, couples facing crises rediscovered love, and people of different faiths came together for the simple truth that love was the way. I noticed this transformation not only in my congregation, but also within myself. With each story shared, with each hug given, I felt the light I experienced on the mountain expanding. It wasn't something I owned, but something I could share, and the more I offered, the more it grew. Grace became a natural leader. His soft, welcoming presence was a magnet for those in need of guidance. She organized spiritual retreats, invited other voices to speak, often even from outside traditional Christianity. Buddhists, Jews, atheists, all were welcome, and the exchange of spiritual experiences enriched everyone. I saw in her a living expression of the message I preached. Love has no barriers. It does not recognize religious or cultural borders. Ethan, now more mature, brought new projects to the community. He started a help group for young drug addicts, sharing his own journey of overcoming it. "If it weren't for that day, when you told me I was already part of the light, I don't know where I would be right now," he told me one afternoon, as we carried boxes of food to the donation bank. Her smile was living proof that love truly transforms. But even in the midst of so many blessings, I knew that my mission would never be complete. The world continued to need more light, more people willing to experience divine love in every gesture, and even decades after my near-death experience, I still felt the presence of that light, still heard the soft call of the wordless voice that once enveloped me in the mountains. Today, as I look at my life, I see that heaven is not a destination, but a state of being. He is present in every moment we choose love over fear, forgiveness over judgment. And even though my journey began in an icy storm, I know it continues in every heart, touched by the message I once received. If you've made it this far, my hope is that you've felt some of this light. May you know that no matter how dark the night, there is always a dawn waiting. And that heaven, after all, is just the home to which we were all always destined to return, not as a reward, but as a reminder that we were always part of that infinite light. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.